I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings, man.
There's always a pecking order. The little packers never mess with the big packers. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
So they took him and another of his friends. There was a younger guy that trained with Mike and Mike's father's friend. And they went to the 1965 Olympia. And
I wanted to talk about that, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's something I wanted to mention because, again, I think it's a big part of the first part of the book because it was a major event in bodybuilding's history, but also in Mike's own history because he managed to sneak into the backstage and meet Larry Scott and Dave Draper.
Yeah.
Who were both on stage at the time. Both won. Dave Draper, Mr. America. Larry Scott, the first Mr. Olympia ever. And I mean, again, you can imagine. I mean, Mike was not even 15. Sorry, my accent is sometimes a little bit wrong.
Yeah.
15. He was just a kid, and so he's there facing all of a sudden in this tiny little storage room with Dave Draper and Larry Scott, who just got back from being on stage and. You know, for 2-3 years, he's been seeing their pictures in the magazines and going like, "Oh, one day I'm going to look like them." And it's just one of those episodes that when you read, when you align them all in front of you, you put them all in front of you, and you go like, "Wow, that is a story that I want to tell." You know, because there are so many such episodes in Mike's life that are just like, as you say, bigger than life, you know. It's just it's something that I would do. I would not sneak backstage to talk to my idol.
Right.
I was 13 or 14 years old.
And didn't he tell them he wanted to be Mr. America?
Sorry, what?
Didn't he tell them he wanted to win Mr. America?
I might have made that up. I
don't
really remember.
I just read that part today.
I have written it down, but I think that's what he said. I think. I mean, most of the things are right. Again, they've been published before, so if I write it, it must have been that I read it somewhere.
Yeah, I just read that.
I'm sorry, I wrote it 7 years ago, so I was a little bit confused in.
I did read that part in your book where Mike told him he wanted to be Mr. America, and I think Dave told him, he goes, "No, you got to be Mr. Olympia. There's Mr. Olympia now, you know." And then
because that was the new thing, and so 1965, the first Mr. Olympia. Joe Weider, big gamble on the future, and you know there's this whole. I mean, of course, I imagine your viewers and listeners are familiar with the Bob Hoffman versus Joe Weider war.
Yeah.
Strength and Health magazine and Muscle Builder, later Muscle and Fitness. You know, two completely different worldviews. Again, like Mike and Schwarzenegger, and again. And that's how the book and Mike's story talks of American history, because basically what that war talks about is the shift from the East Coast culture of American East Coast culture, which is very military, industrial, making things, you know, science, university, first settlers, pioneers, you know, and so Bob Hoffman, basically, you know, strong, rigid, serious. It's not about fun. It's about fighting for the greater good. And then little by little, in the second half of the 20th century, American culture switches from that, which suddenly becomes kind of like old and boring and gray and to the West Coast culture, which is Hollywood, bimbos, you know, muscle on the beach, and it's a completely different approach. And so Bob Hoffman, Joe Weider, and Joe Weider is fighting. His big fight is to outmode Bob Hoffman and to claim the crown of the muscle king, or the king of the muscle world. And so we're not going to go into the details, but there was a lot of things that were wrong with the AAU in the way they did the bodybuilding contest. Absolutely. They had that very old school view of bodybuilding was kind of like the bad smaller brother of weightlifting. So, and Joe Weider wanted to change that because Joe Weider understood that the youth culture, the new baby boomers culture of America, all these kids born after the war, they were embracing this culture of, you know, body beautiful, freedom of the body, you know, showing more skin. And Joe Weider had that understanding. And so he said, we got to get rid of all that, you know, bullshit of Hoffman and the military industrial complex and they want fun, they want superheroes, they want, you know, big bimbo guys with girls at their feet posing on the beach.
Right.
And his big gamble was say, okay, I'm gonna create a new title, Mr. Olympia, that's gonna bring everyone together, you know, enough with the Mr. this and Mr. that, Mr. Olympia is going to be the biggest crown in the bodybuilding world. And so he organized it in the Brooklyn Academy of Music, which is an amazing building. I mean, I imagine you've been there. It's very classical. It's very, very imposing, but it's more attuned to, you know, opera or high culture, quote unquote, events. You know, theater and drama. And there you have it in 1965. Black leather jacket crowds, you know, like all these kind of like street kids who liked bodybuilding and superheroes already at the time, and you know, and they storm into that very classical building to watch the. And if you, I mean, of course, you've read Muscle Wars by Ricky Wayne, but the way he describes that event, was very inspiring for me. And you know, I mixed it up with other sources. But I think it was a night to remember, and I think it's amazing to have, you know, kids today who can read that and realize what craziness it was at the time to have an event like that for bodybuilding.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about John Ziegler. Now, John Ziegler was the one who brought Diana Ball into the culture, and he was connected with the weightlifting world. And you write about him in the book, right, Nicolas?
Oh, yeah. Well, so not only I read about him because he played a big role in the history of the sport, bodybuilding, and all the sport, because as you said, he introduced testosterone and Diana Ball. So that's the first reason. Second reason, he was another bigger than life character, and that's one thing about that book. And Mike's story and the way I weave all those stories together is that all these guys, when you dive into their lives, whether it's Bob Hoffman, Joe Weider, Doug Ziegler, Arthur Jones, and of course Mike and Arnold, you know, I mean, all these guys are so much like bigger than life characters that you wouldn't even believe it. Like if you were told today that there's a guy like that, I mean, maybe you compare them to like the Elon Musk or the Zuckerberg or Trump, actually.
Or Trump,
You know what I mean? These guys were just like so much bigger than that. And so Ziegler was like that. So when I dove into the, you know, online world and written resources like Randy Roach's book, and Ziegler was just like a completely crazy character. Like he was huge, very tall, very big.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Well, I mean, he wasn't like fit in a bodybuilding fit, but he was
just a big man.
And very imposing. I think I don't know my feet and my inches, so I'm not gonna. But anyway, he was very, very imposing physically. He had a booming voice. He'd been through everything. He'd been to the war. He'd fought in the war. He traveled the whole world, and he was a big drinker. So he was part of the. It was actually Grimek, John Grimek, another even older bodybuilding golden era champion, amazing guy, an amazing physique. I mean, to me, in my view, to that day, there's never been a comparable physique to that of Grimek. But anyway, Ziegler met Grimek a little bit by chance at a gym when Ziegler was recruiting what do you call them, guinea pigs, like lab rats for his own experimenting with testosterone. And so he met Grimek by chance, and then Grimek introduced Ziegler to the York gang, Bob Hoffman, and Strength and Health, and so all the weightlifting Olympics team. And Ziegler went to Russia for the Olympics, and he talked with the doctor of the Russian team, not the Russian, the Soviet team. At the time it was Soviet, and the doctor, told Ziegler, he said, well, I think my guys, they're that strong because they take this and that. And anyway, so, and then the third reason why I write about Ziegler is that he played a major role in my life. And that's something I didn't know.
Didn't know that either. No.
When I talk about East Coast versus West Coast, and of course you know that, but I think for people who don't know, we don't necessarily realize how much of a small, corner of the United States, that you could call maybe New England, or, basically that whole part, between Philadelphia, Springfield, York, and there was so much going on in terms of weightlifting, bodybuilding, the science of it. And so it was, all those towns and cities were not that far away from each other. So all those guys knew each other. And so Mike somehow going to work to York, met with Ziegler when he was pretty young still, and so possibly Ziegler prescribed steroids to him. And
how old was Mike at the time, Nicholas?
I don't really remember. I'm sorry.
Okay,
maybe like 7 years ago.
18, 19?
A little younger than that.
Oh, younger. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I will have to 16 basically.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe 17. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I don't want to say something wrong, and it's a long way back in.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was pretty young. But again, it was not that extraordinary at the time. And Schwarzenegger started taking steroids when he was 13. And again, I'm not the one covering that. It's been written many times before from trustworthy sources. So I don't think it was that extraordinary. But what's interesting is that Mike meets again Ziegler a few years later in, I think, 1971. And Ziegler at the time had taken his distance with steroids. He was afraid of the creature he'd created, because it had become such an epidemic of steroids abuse that Ziegler kind of stepped away from it, and he started working on the isotron. Have you ever heard of the isotron?
Is that a machine?
Yeah, the electro-stimulating machine.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Mike worked with Ziegler on the isotron for a few months when he was a student or in between studies. And he and Ray, Mike's brother, they were the operators of the isotron for Ziegler's clients. So a lot of them were athletes that had been injured or they wanted to try a new way to train, and so that was an important time in Mike's life because he didn't really know where he was going at the time. He'd injured himself in 1970-71. He had a major shoulder injury, which kept him away from training for a few months. He should have gotten surgery, but he didn't because he didn't have the financial means. And so there was a bit of a patchy period in his life where he didn't really know what to do. And Ziegler picked him up and said, well, come with me, work with me. I'm going to put you back on your feet. And he started the whole machine going. And also Ziegler mentioned to Mike a few writers that were very influential in Mike's thinking. One of them, a guy that's mostly forgotten now, called Ziegler, who wrote on the stress adaptation syndrome, which is a major part of Mike's theory of muscle building, that your body adapts to on the stress, and that's how you build muscle, and that's why you need to train intensely, very intensely, and very hard, because otherwise you don't create that stress situation that's gonna trigger muscle growth. So it's Ziegler who mentioned Zellier to Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, and he also mentioned another guy, a Japanese writer called Mishima, who was a novelist and a poet and also a politician. And Mishima had he played a major role in Mike's view of the world, in the sense that Mishima also, like Mike, even though he was not a bodybuilding champion, but he did lift weights, and he had this idea that the body and mind could work together. The training of the body was a training for the mind, and the training and having a well structured or science-based mind helps you train your body better.
Okay.
And again, those are things that in Mike's early adulthood, when he was a little bit not really sure which direction to go, that played a major role that you keep finding in his writing all the way through to hit the end of his life. So a lot of people talk about Ayn Rand and how, I mean, she was a major influence on Mike's thinking, but she only came out much later, like in the late 70s, early 80s. Before that, there was all these writers that Ziegler introduced Mike to, that you keep finding in his writing all the way to the end.
Okay, yeah. Talk a little bit about Mike's period from like 1971 to 75, because he was kind of off the bodybuilding competitive scale then, right? And didn't he try to go to medical school at that time?
Yeah. So that's what I was. The things that I've just said, they happened during
that time. Okay.
Periods.
Okay.
71, 74. He doesn't really know where to go. Ziegler meets again with him because again they all live, not too far away from each other. All the guys go to one another's gym, and Ziegler puts him back on his feet, not just with training and the isotron and also just work out, but also with these writers that, because again Mike was a very, you could say, brainy guy. I mean, his fire was in his brain more than in his body. And so reading those guys that I've just mentioned, they really triggered his, again, they rekindled the fire in his mind of going like, okay, I have a mission for the world. There is something I need to achieve, and I'm going to achieve it. And it's in that period. So there's an episode in the book where Dave goes to visit Mike in I think it was Washington, and Mike is staying with Ray and two other friends, and they go. It's in 1972, and they go to the Rolling Stones concert on the 4th of July.
Okay.
It's one of the biggest tours, rock and roll tours in history. The Rolling Stones at the time are regarded as the most dangerous band in the world. They because there's been so much going on in their tours, drugs and sex and riot and everything. There's been the tour before that is when there was this black kid who got
Altamont,
Altamont, the black kid got stabbed and killed or murdered, so it was a major tour, and Dave at the time works for the National Guard, and not works for, but he's with the National Guard, and he's stationed near where Mike lives, and so they decide to go together to the tour. And so the way Dave told me that story, and that I tell in the book, it was, Mike was not in a very good place at that time. Like, it was obvious that he was kind of like, he wasn't really sure what to do with his life. He was studying for a pre-med, but he had kind of like lost the motivation for that because, again, of writers that he read at the time who were questioning the whole psychiatry approach. They said that madness was a social construct, and that there was a lot of things going on in Mike's head. And so they go to the tour, and it's a major night in their life. They lose the car. They can't remember where they've parked the car afterwards. They have to stay on the parking lot for hours while everyone, walks out. It's like 40,000 people. Wow. And it's the Independence Day, it's the 4th of July. There's fireworks.
Yeah.
it's I mean, people who've read that part, they remember it as a very beautiful part of Mike's life and his friendship with Dave too, because that's another big part of the book is the friendship with Dave. I think is interesting because Dave was always the guy who was not, he didn't have, how can I say, Dave was happy with what he got.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, so of course he wanted, he would have wished to actually win. He did early in his career, but major titles later on. But what I mean when I say that, I mean that Mike was really, he was more like the dreamer. Mike was the guy who always thought what more could be achieved and how much further you could go. And Mike was driven by this, fire for intensity and truth and and Dave, and in a story when you have two guys like that, two friends like that, where one is just, he's really nice, very, very sweet, and he's more in many ways he's wiser, because Mike's passion for the truth and the ideal, that took him against the wall. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when you look at life, from a little bit of a distance, and you go like, well, I mean, wouldn't have you been happier if you'd been a little bit less intense, a little bit more satisfied with, okay, I've done my part, I've won my titles, let's, move on and do something else. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly. Yeah. Dave was in that 65 Mr. America, the one that Mike saw with the Olympia. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's how they became friends.
Oh, that's how they became friends? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Mike was in the audience and he was already, I mean, as I explained in the book, he'd been training for 2 years, started really early.
Yeah.
He was passionate about it. That was his big thing. The adults, his father's friends, they take him to New York and to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
He's in the audience. And so before he sleeps backstage after the show, while he's in the audience, he sees Dave on stage, the youngest contestant for Mr. America ever.
Yeah.
Dave is 15 years old.
Right.
and when you look at the picture, it's stunning. It's like literally, it's unbelievable to see such a physique on such a young kid. I mean, it's and Mike goes like, oh wow, okay, so I can do that, because Mike is a little younger.
Yeah.
But he goes like, oh, I don't have to wait like 10 years to look like that. It is actually possible. And so they didn't meet at the Olympia, but Mike found, I mean, again, it's a small
community,
but the whole region. So Mike knew because the MC told during the evening that Dave was trained by Ed Jubinville, who was also a big name of the strength world from way back when. And so Mike found Ed Jubinville's address in Strength and Health, because I don't know, there was like an ad or something, or and so he wrote to Dave via Ed Jubinville, and he wrote him a letter. He said, hey, I saw you at the Olympia, it's amazing, I want to look like you, I want to be your friend, you're going to teach me everything you know. And that's how it started. And I mean, really, their friendship, I find it very moving, because it's a friendship that lasted their whole life. Like, there was just a little part of Mike's life when he started really like falling apart in the late 80s, where they kept apart. It was just a few years. Aside from that, between when they're 14, 15 years old up until Mike's death, they've remained very good friends, and they're very different personalities, but they're both animated by the same passion and the same love for progress, what America stood for at the time. And Steve Reeves, of course, and it's so moving. And when I met Dave the first time, I mean, you have to imagine you're Dave Mastorakis, the champion from the old days. You live in your little house, and you get an email from a French guy who you've never heard of, who's never written a book before, and the guy is me. And I wrote Dave and I said, hello, da da da. I want to write about Mike Mentzer. I've heard you were a good friend. Would you want to talk? And he actually invited me over, to his house. And
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, we spent 2 weeks, and literally every day he spent hours with me going through his memories.
Wow.
And the way, and he was very moved, and it was
Yeah.
very moving for me, but he was very moved just remembering that. And he was and he still is so sad about, what happened to Mike. It was very moving for me. I mean, there were some times when I was literally crying.
Wow, no kidding.
Yeah, just because it's such a beautiful, I mean, again, and I'm probably a bit more of a sensitive guy, you could say. I had tears in my eyes, just the strength of their friendship and going through the decades, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And we trained together. So he put me through the high intensity training.
Okay.
We did a few sessions with him. And yeah, I mean, he's such a great guy, and I'm forever thankful to that he has agreed to, as I said, open the door to a completely unknown foreign guy out of the blue.
Yeah.
So that's
awesome.
The greatness of the guy that he is.
Another significant part in Mike's life was the 71 America, when he met Arthur Jones and then Casey Viator, who was the winner of the contest.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Arthur Jones is, I mean, you could write a whole
book about him, for sure.
On Arthur Jones, which actually he has already. I mean, there's two. Arthur Jones wrote his own autobiography called "And God Laughs," which is available online. I mean, at least it was.
Okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was in 2017, 18 when I was writing the book. I imagine that it's still available, even though it might have been taken out because, I mean, talk about bad-mouthing Arnold. Like,
really?
I actually quote, I quote what Arthur wrote about Arnold as a quote from Arthur. And, I'm safe because it's a quote from Arthur. It's not me saying it. But he goes like really all out on how.
Wow. Is that book still available, Nicolas?
Huh?
Is that book still available, or did they take it away?
As I said, it was in 2018 or 2019.
Okay.
I imagine it still is. So yeah, Arthur Jones was another bigger than life character. I mean, did you know that he started producing and directing a TV show where he was fighting animals in the wild?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
In foreign countries, like faraway countries. So I mean, that tells you already a little bit of the guy. And he was a self-taught, completely self-taught, very aggressive, very intense.
Yeah.
And passionate about strength and muscle and masculinity, and all these things were in his head all associated. And he started, designing this new approach. And he was like, there is something wrong in the way people train. It shouldn't be. Like, he saw the Weider inflation in every sense of the world of, get ever bigger, train ever longer, and he was like, that doesn't make sense. So he started putting together the tenets of his high intensity training. But he also designed the Nautilus, the of the machine that completely changes the approach. And again, we were saying earlier that most people in every community, bodybuilding and every other community, don't challenge the way people think or the things people do. They're just like, well, people have always done that. This is the way things are done. So why questioning? Jones went as far as saying even a bicep curl doesn't make sense. Because he said, the way physics work, the gravity is vertical.
Distance falls off,
Yeah. So he said the point of tension is only like maybe 10 degrees of the whole, 130 degrees of the movement. So basically, all the 10 degrees left are useless. I'm
Yeah.
you know, I'm putting it a bit more simple than he actually phrases it, but that was. I'm just saying he went as far as to challenge something as basic and as self-evident as an arm curl. And so in 1970, he introduced the Blue Monster, the first machine design, which was literally a monster. It was huge, shiny metal blue, and people were just like, "What is that?" They've never seen anything like that. And
Right.
you have to realize that. I mean, and of course you know, but machines were not that popular at the time. Like people train more with bars and dumbbells, but training with machines was not that popular at the time. So you had this huge machine, and he was looking for a champion that would really, I mean, as you say, once you have a guy with a physique to literally embody your training philosophy, people take you a bit more seriously. So he was looking for a guy, and he met Casey Viator, I think, yeah, in 1970, and so they came back 1 year later in 1971, and that's when Viator won the Mr. America.
Yeah.
He was the youngest Mr. America winner ever.
Yes.
And Mike was competed in that contest.
Yeah.
And he placed 10, I think.
Yes, 10.
But he won best legs and best arms, which is not negligible. When he had only had 3 contests. He was only his 3rd contest.
Wow.
He'd only gone back to training for a few months because of the shoulder injury. He'd stayed away from the gym. Yeah, and so he placed 10th. Is not, you could say, well, it's not that good, but best legs and best arms. And he was, again, like Casey, he was 19. So he met Casey Viator that night, and Casey, they connected. They were both the youngest contestants.
Same age, yeah.
They were both mastodon compared to the other guys. They already both had that higher order physique.
Yeah.
And so of course they connected. And Casey said, well, you should call that guy, and he gave Arthur Jones' name to Mike, name and number to Mike. Mike left a message, and he never heard back. I mean, he didn't hear back for a while, and then one night, in the middle of the night, literally in the middle of the night, the phone rings, and Arthur starts screaming at him because he never spoke in a calm way. He was very intense.
Right.
And he started explaining Mike the whole revolution of how to train. And Mike went down to Florida sometime later to train with Arthur. And I mean, it was a big, and that's another thing I think that speaks to Mike's greatness, or the integrity, the honesty. Like in every one of his writing, especially the books that he published later in his life about heavy duty, his own version of high intensity training, he always explained that he owed the basis to Arthur Jones.
Yeah.
A lot of the guys, and you know that better than me, a lot of the guys who write, especially at the time, maybe now it has changed, I don't know, but for a long time, a lot of the guys who wrote books about their own training philosophy, they never quoted their mentors. They always pretended that they did it themselves.
Yeah.
And Mike could easily have everyone believe that he had invented the whole thing, because when he publishes Heavy Duty in the mid-90s, I mean, Arthur Jones is almost completely forgotten. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's not the type of guy that Mike was. He explained that, Arthur Jones had laid the basis and he built on them. Just like Dorian Yates, explained that he evolved Heavy Duty in his own blood and guts training methods.
Yeah.
But he has the guts and the honesty to say, I learned the basics from Mike, and it was an inspiration for me, and I took it further and improved on it. But I think that speaks a lot to the type of guys that they are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. let's talk a little bit about Mike's relationship with Joe Weider, because, after the 1980 Olympia, the feeling was that Joe kind of pushed Mike out of the business because, he was speaking badly about the 1980 Olympia and they didn't want that kind of, talk. So they kind of pushed him out. But in the beginning, I mean, Joe was the one who offered Mike a job, and then Mike moved all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast to California. And he was, the managing editor, or the editor in chief, I believe, of Muscle and Fitness, or I'm not sorry, Muscle Builder magazine. And he was writing all those articles. I mean, that's when I was into bodybuilding. That's when I first started. So I would read Mike's articles every month. And like you said, he was a great writer. And most of those bodybuilders had their articles ghostwritten by other writers. But Mike was actually writing his own stuff. So it seemed like Joe had a real affinity for Mike and a real affection for Mike in the beginning, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so the whole, I mean, again, I wouldn't want listeners and viewers to believe that, the way I tell the story is very binary. You have good Mike and bad Arnold and bad Joe. That's totally not it. I mean, I've been told that it's a good book precisely because, like every good novel that you read, things are always a bit more complex than people would think to be from a superficial point of view. And so the relationship with Joe is very and also the relationship between Joe and Arnold is also very, very complex and multifaceted. And so Joe loved Mike. When he saw Mike come onto the bodybuilding stage, into the bodybuilding world, he was like, that is the guy of the future. And so that's why, literally, as I said earlier, the first major article about Mike, signed by Armand Tani, is Mike Mentzer, superstar of the future. Yeah. And they're the one, like Joe and Armand, they're the one who started talking about the thinking man's bodybuilder. That's what Mike was called at the time, as you would remember. Right. They talked about the thinking man's bodybuilder. That's because Joe was whatever people want to say about him, how greedy he was or how manipulative he was, whatever. There was one thing about him that was absolutely unquestionable: is how passionate he was about muscle, about bodybuilding, about his sport. Not just because of the money he made of it, just because he loved it. Yeah, he loved it. He grew up, with Eugene Sandow story, the first bodybuilder ever. Remake, all these guys. I mean, even Bob Hoffman, he loved Bob Hoffman, even though, they fought. So Joe was passionate about bodybuilding, and he desperately wanted bodybuilding to be taken seriously. Just like Ben, his brother, they were obsessed about getting bodybuilding into the Olympics. Mm-hmm. Never happened, as you know. And you could wonder why. There's plenty of, especially the new sport, anyway, let's not start that debate now. But so they were really passionate about bodybuilding, and they were both, they wanted bodybuilding to be taken seriously. So when Mike comes onto the stage and he's very articulate and he has this kind of like very, approachable face, like he was very handsome, very serious, looking very smart, writing very smart, very articulate. They were like, that's the guy that's gonna take, bodybuilding out to the greater world and present it as the great effort and achievement that it is for mankind. Yeah. So, and I think also, Joe possibly saw in Mike the son, like, or what's the expression in English? A son that he would have liked to have. I'm sorry, I can't find the expression, but there was this kind of like, Mike had this very, even for the 70s, Mike had a kind of like old school look. Like the long hair parted in the middle, the strong man mustache. Yeah. And this is what Joe tried to look like. For many. Okay. So I think there was kind of like Joe saw in Mike the guy that he would have wanted to be. Okay. And so after the 1980 Olympia, they remained friends for a while. And Mike started to understand that maybe Joe was not the manipulative guy. Maybe the one who was holding the strings was Arnold, and that Arnold actually, because after the 1980 Olympia, people criticized the results, but they didn't criticize Arnold. They criticized the IFBB and they criticized Joe Weider. But no one said, oh my God, Arnold has cheated. They said the IFBB is rotten and, you know, everything needs to change, which they did actually. They had a big conference in Manila the next year, an IFBB international conference with all the IFBBs in the world, where they laid out new rules for judging.
Right.
Because everyone was so upset about what had happened. But so in the few months, after the 1980 Olympia, you know, at first Mike thinks that Joe is the master of puppets and Arnold is, you know, just one of his puppets. But as time goes, as months go by, Mike starts to realize that actually Joe may be as much a victim as he is of the big master of puppets, which Arnold was. And so actually, Joe asked Mike to write an article called Thanks, Joe, where Mike tells the story of his relationship with Joe. And they were really good friends. Like, they will have dinner together. They would, you know, talk about books and philosophy and art, which is something that Joe could never do. Joe never had that kind of relationship with Arnold.
Yeah.
He always said that he was always complained that their relationship was kind of like very superficial and very business oriented.
Okay.
But so with Mike, they were really good friends, and then Joe wrote an article about Mike, praising Mike, because Arnold and Franco had started bad mouthing Mike, saying that he would never have an international physique. Offered Mike for a long time. So Joe gave Mike a big platform, even before the Olympia. Like, Mike was writing many articles a month, many articles a month for Muscle Builder and Muscle and Fitness later on.
Right.
And even when he was not writing the articles, there were pictures of him everywhere. He went on the cover for many times. So Joe gave Mike a big platform, and then Joe started promising to Mike the job of editor-in-chief, and it never happened. Mike, you know, was, as you can imagine, very disappointed by that. But what I try to explain in the book is that from Joe's perspective, you know, having worked a little bit in media and communication, and I mean, it wouldn't have worked. It was just not possible. Knowing all the controversy around Mike, knowing how Mike was very vocal against the scams of the bodybuilding world, the fake science, it's like Mike was literally the kind of guy who would write in an article that everyone else's methods were bullshit, that you didn't need to stuff yourself with proteins because the only purpose it has was to make the protein brands richer or corporations richer. You know, so I mean, if you're a director of a magazine, you can't have that guy being editor-in-chief.
Right.
You know, it will have
meant magazine.
Yeah. It would have become Mike's magazine. And Joe was, as a businessman, he was smart enough to say, well, wait a second, Mike, you know, people have different ways of training. You're not the only champion on earth. People have achieved great physiques with other methods. Why don't we let them speak, you know, and everyone has their own platform and you still be around. But so I think it didn't, so Mike took it, I think, quite personally, but from Joe's perspective, it made a lot of sense.
Yeah. Why do you think Mike's magazine didn't work out, the workout magazine? Why do you think it only lasted a couple issues?
So there's various theories or explanations. No one really knows.
Okay. I think it was kind of ahead of its time, maybe. Like you said, it was a precursor for men's health, but you think it was kind of ahead of
I think, well, it's obvious when you read it. When you read it, it's really obvious how much of a precursor to men's health it is.
Yeah.
Not as well done and not as sexy and and fun to read.
Yeah.
But as I said, the intuition that, people want to work out, but they don't all want to look like Tim Belknap or I don't even know, people don't want, not everybody wants to look like a bodybuilder.
Right.
So he had that intuition, and no one else had it at the time. So that's quite something. I think, so he believed that the greater master of puppets was behind the plugging out of his magazine.
Oh, really? Okay.
I couldn't find any proof of it. No one could really tell me the exact truth that happened. I was told that some of the people who had invested in it didn't think it was good enough. And it's true that, it pains me to say that, but the few issues that I've had in hand, they looked a bit amateurish.
Yeah.
Is that a word? Yeah.
Yeah.
So and also another thing that, so I invented a scene between an investor and Mike, where the guy said, "Well, we're gonna cut your magazine. We're gonna stop your magazine because it's just not working."
Yeah.
But and so what the guys, it's a made up character. Huh? What I put in his mouth, I think is, I think a lot of people would agree that it could have been the analysis of a marketing consultant or a communication consultant looking at the magazine, which, by the way, was my job. Before I started writing books, I worked in advertising, and so when you look at the magazine, you can easily understand how it's not really clear where it stands. Like every magazine has their own positioning. And Mike, because that was always his ambition, was, his obsession was what he called the integrated man.
Yeah.
So integrated man, it's a noble spirit, noble mind in a noble body, and so he wanted to make an integrated magazine that would talk about all aspects of life, philosophy, training, diet, science, and that type of magazine, it's very hard to achieve, because most people, they buy a cooking magazine, or they buy a bodybuilding magazine, or a sports magazine, but there's very few magazines that manage to talk about everything at once.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that might have been a reason. But again, and that's another part of the conversation that I have recreated, I've been told that every issue sold out. So if it sold out, it means that it worked.
Yeah.
So I don't really know. I think it was a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And possibly also Mike's mind was already kind of like falling apart. But definitely the fact that workout stopped definitely was the ultimate blow. So 1980 Olympia, he breaks up with Kathy Gelfo.
Yeah.
Big love of his life, biggest love of his life. His father dies.
Did she break up with him, Nicolas, or did he break up with her?
I think I've been told that she broke up with him.
She broke up with him. Okay.
But I had very little. So I think I've managed to recreate, and again, from what Dave told me and John told me.
Yeah.
The way I talk of their relationship is very close to the truth. But I didn't. She never replied to my email, so I didn't have her own perspective. So I've tried to keep it just as a background story, but it was obviously a very, like Mike repeatedly said that it was the biggest love of his life, and so
Sure.
and the breakup. So that's also why I believe that she broke up, is that he said 20 years later, he said, "I never really recovered from the breakup."
Wow.
If you say that, it means that you're the one that was dumped, not the dumper.
Yeah.
So breakup with Kathy Gaffo, his father dies. He had a financial problem with his accountant, and he had to sell his house in Palm Springs unwillingly, and then workout stops.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot for one man, So yeah.
Yeah, it was a tragic story of Mike Mentzer. I mean, definitely, like I said, rise to the top and then down. Yeah,
Yeah, even the down, even the fall, it's not just like a straight out fall. As I said, he keeps coming back with
yeah.
great ideas then there's
Came back with
definitely
the personal training for a while. Yeah, before he passed.
he definitely reaches the bottom. With the few years around late 80s, early 90s, where he's institutionalized a few times. There's crazy rumors going around about him.
Yeah,
Then he comes back, the Dorian Yates being Mr. Olympia and
yeah,
thanking officially after his second Olympia, I think. There's a little short interview of him holding his sando, and he says, "I want to thank Mike Mentzer for da 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 da." And so all of a sudden, Mike Mentzer comes back as a credible voice in the world of bodybuilding, where he'd been completely trashed and wiped out. And so for 2 years, 1992 up until 2001, he manages to, he has this he's a consulting, what do you call it? Training,
right? Yeah,
personal training courses on the phone, live. So that's where you start. When you go online and you type Mike Mentzer, you see a lot of these guys who trained with him in the late 90s. And they say, "Oh, I met up with him. He was such a good guy, but he smoked terribly of tobacco because he was a good smoker." It's always the same stories.
Yeah.
That I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. But I think he was no longer. He was just I don't know, half of what it was in many ways.
Yeah.
He still had that fire burning.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll let you go, Nicholas. It was great talking to you for the last couple hours. And the book is called Mr. America. That's Mister, Mr. America. And I'll have the link below. And congratulations on getting it translated to English and having it in the United States. And I can't wait to read the whole thing. And congratulations on putting together such a great novel for your first effort, too.
Thank you, John. It was my pleasure talking to you and sharing those anecdotes. And I do hope people will enjoy the book. I've tried to make it as thrilling. And as I said, when we discussed before, it's kind of like a page turner, even though it's 700 pages. Because I've tried to bring back to life all these years and these greater, bigger characters. And anyway, thank you so much.
I love how you did it too, making it like a novel instead of just writing another biography about Mike. That's a really innovative way of doing it, and I think it's going to be really exciting because, like you said, there were so many characters in the bodybuilding world that were larger than life. So it's like a fiction novel in a way,
Yeah, that's what started me. I mean, when I discovered the story, I was like, it has all the ingredients of a great Hollywood movie. It's like Anyway, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And à bientôt, as we say in French.
All right. I wish you the best of luck with it, Nicholas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.